Have you ever seen a painting that is at once beautiful and really unsettling? One you can't get out of your head, even if you can't tell why? That is Arnold Böcklin's Die Toteninsel, or Isle of the Dead in English, specifically the third and most famous version. Throughout its existence, this painting has captivated some of the most brilliant and powerful minds in history, including Sigmund Freud, Lenin, Salvador Dali, and even Adolf Hitler. It's a work of art that is both hauntingly fascinating, as if it emerged directly from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. What hidden secrets lurk within the shadows of the cypress trees? And what role does the death of our loved ones play in it all? On the surface, there's nothing explicitly scary about the picture. You see a small, steeply rising rocky island, overgrown with dark cypress trees. It's massive and impenetrable, like a fortress emerging from a perfectly smooth, dark body of water. A small rowboat approaches the island. In the bow stands a figure dressed in white. The boat glides silently across the water. A chilling stillness pervades everything. The painting doesn't feel like a real place, but rather an emotion that has taken on form, a mix of grief, isolation, and a solemn farewell. At the same time, the island seems both menacing and mysterious. What makes this painting so iconic and so powerful? How did it become a cultural phenomenon admired by ideologically opposing figures like Freud, Lenin, and Hitler? How could it inspire a composer like Sergei Rachmaninoff to create one of the most mournful and at the same time moving works in classical music? It's a story that goes far beyond brushstrokes and canvas. It's a tale of personal pain, of dealing with death, and of how an art dealer turned a private expression of emotion into a mass phenomenon. It is also part of a very dark chapter in human history. The dream image. Arnold Böcklin, born in Basel in 1827, was an artist with a restless soul. He was drawn to the world from an early age. From Düsseldorf, where he studied landscape painting under Johann Wilhelm Schirmer, to Paris, where he copied works at the Louvre, and finally to Rome. It was in the Eternal City that Böcklin discovered his fascination with the ancient world and Italian nature, which would later infuse his compositions with mythological and allegorical figures. His artistic evolution moved from an initially academic landscape painting style to a unique symbolist one. But his life was marked by an unspeakable recurring pain. Böcklin had to endure the early death of 8 of his 14 children. He himself narrowly escaped death from typhoid fever in 1859. These personal tragedies became a central subconscious theme in his work. He painted death not as an intellectual concept, but as a deep felt personal trauma that he authentically processed in his art. The deeply rooted engagement with mortality that defines his work was thus not just a philosophical, artistic pursuit, but a really personal one. Yet, from this profound grief, a work of art was born that became a symbol of comfort and farewell, the first version of Isle of the Dead. Imagine the artist Arnold Böcklin in his Florence studio in May 1880. He has already laid the groundwork for a landscape on a canvas, but the composition is unfinished. On that day, a woman named Marie Berner, a recently widowed patron, visits him. When she sees the unfinished painting, she is deeply moved and asks Böcklin to create a painting to dream by, to serve as a memorial for her deceased husband. This is the crucial moment. At her explicit request, Böcklin adds the now iconic details. He paints the figure in white. He adds the rower and the coffin decorated with garlands. With these few details, he transforms an atmospheric landscape into a story whose symbolism won't let you go. The original landscape became what we now know as the Isle of the Dead. Only through the sorrow of a grieving widow. Böcklin kept the very first version of the painting and created a second, slightly smaller version for Marie Berner. Over the years, Böcklin created a total of 5 versions of Isle of the Dead. Each differs in colors and atmosphere. illustrating the artist's changing moods and the demands of his clients. For example, the first two versions he painted in 1880 feel mysterious and sad, while from the third version from 1883 onwards, the scene appears lighter and softer. Interestingly, Böcklin's son, Carlo, even completed a sixth version after his father's death. Böcklin himself later painted a counterpart to Isle of the Dead, titled Isle of the Living, which depicts a scene full of joy, light, and celebrating figures, making it the complete opposite of the Isle of the Dead. Many myth also surrounds the island itself. Was the inspiration for the Isle of the Dead the English cemetery in Florence, where one of Böcklin's daughters was buried? Or is it the cemetery island of San Michele in Venice? Or perhaps the Castello Aragonese on Ischia, which Böcklin visited in the autumn of 1879 and allegedly named as inspiration for the painting to one of his students. The answer is both simple and complicated. It was likely none of these alone. The painting is more a collage of Böcklin's memories and impressions of various places. The island is not a realistic depiction, but, as Marie Berner requested, a dream image that merges different motifs into an imaginary metaphorical landscape. What is seen in the painting is the symbolic resolution of his own pain. The rocky island itself, that fortress of solitude, represents the finality of death. The cypress trees on the island are traditional symbols of mourning and eternity, which is why they are often found in cemeteries. They underscore the painting's melancholic mood. The figure in white is often interpreted as a soul being taken to its final resting place, or as a grieving widow. Another, rarer interpretation sees the white figure as the penultimate ancient human, being carried to his grave by the last, giving the painting a philosophical, elegiac meaning about the death of an entire era. The rower is often interpreted as Charon, the mythical ferryman who, in Greek mythology, carries souls across the river Styx into the underworld. Böcklin's personal pain thus became the raw material for a work that provides universal comfort. It is a work that doesn't hide grief, but transform it into a sublime, dignified scene. The mass phenomenon. But how did this private, sorrowful painting become a phenomenon that would achieve such widespread fame? The true story of why the painting became so famous begins not in the studio, but in the office of a clever art dealer. The persistent and almost hypnotic appeal of Isle of the Dead is due to its strong ambiguity. The painting asks questions, but provides no direct answer. Who is the figure in white? What is hidden behind the dark cypress trees and in the tombs? The absence of a clear narrative and the static, timeless atmosphere makes the work a universal canvas for projection. But to become a true phenomenon, it needs more than just room for imagination. It needed good marketing. The clever art dealer Fritz Gurlitt recognized the commercial potential of the mysterious motif. He was the one who commissioned the third version of the painting and gave it its iconic, marketable title, Isle of the Dead. Böcklin himself had initially called the first version the Isle of Graves. Gurlitt realized he could turn the private contemplation of death into something for everyone. He commissioned the graphic artist Max Klinger to create an etching of the third version, which was ideal for mass reproduction. The lighter, daylight-painted scene of this version was technically easier to reproduce and thus found its way into countless homes in the German-speaking world. The popularity was so great that the writer Vladimir Nabokov noted that the reproduction of the painting could be found in almost every Berlin home. The morbid atmosphere and sublime depiction of death reflected the mood of the fin de siècle, an era defined by decadence and hedonism, but above all by melancholy and a preoccupation with death and transience. Additionally, the third version is the one that captures Böcklin's personal connection to the work in a special way. It's the first version that Böcklin signed. This was likely not appropriate for previous commissioned works, but made perfect sense for a work for the anonymous art market. However, he didn't just sign the image at the edge. Above the entrance of the tomb on the far right, the artist chiseled his initials AB into the stone. Some art historians see this as a deliberate decision by Böcklin to inscribe himself into the painting's narrative, as a sign of his deep connection to the death that so often haunted his family. But it was also a way to assert his authorship of this increasingly popular painting. The painting's success was ultimately a combination of artistic genius, a feel for the zeitgeist, and the power of the art market at the end of the 19th century. Without this marketing strategy, The Isle of the Dead might have remained an intellectual work of symbolism, but not a universally known cultural asset. Hitler and the Isle of the Dead. The painting's popularity was so widespread that it also captivated one of the most central and terrifying figures in history. The dictator acquired the third version of the painting in 1936 and first hung it in the Berghof in Obersalzberg and later in the new Reich Chancellery in Berlin. Today, this version can be seen at the Alte Nationalgalerie in Berlin. But what fascinated Adolf Hitler so much about this painting? In the painting, Hitler likely did not see grief, but solemn heroic farewell. For him, the picture perfectly suited his ideology, which glorified death not as an end, but as a sacrifice for the nation. Hitler reinterpreted the melancholic scene as a sublime and dignified embodiment of self-sacrifice for his own misanthropic philosophy. But he wasn't the only one fascinated by the Isle of the Dead. Sigmund Freud also had a reproduction of the painting in his office. The motif appeals to deep, unconscious human fears and desires, which was of great relevance to the founder of psychoanalysis. Lenin also hung a copy of the painting in his apartment, which he moved into in Zurich in 1916. The fact that the same work captivated such opposing personalities shows that its message was universal, and that the confronting with mortality and the unknown is a fundamental human drive, regardless of ideological beliefs. The timeless legacy. So the painting has had an almost eerie journey. Starting as a private commission for a grieving widow, it became a mass phenomenon through clever marketing. It inspired artists and composers like Sergei Rachmaninoff, who composed the symphonic poem Isle of the Dead in 1909 after seeing a black and white reproduction of the painting. But the appeal of the Isle of the Dead extends far beyond classical music. References can be found in film and television, such as in the 1945 film Isle of the Dead by Mark Robson, or in series like Pretty Little Liars and the anime Neo Yokio. The painting's mystical power also inspired the world of video games, such as Doom: The Dark Ages and the card game Gwent: The Witcher card game. Furthermore, the famous Spanish surrealist Salvador Dalí created a painting in 1932 titled The True Picture of the Isle of the Dead after Arnold Böcklin's painting The Isle of the Dead, and H.R. Giger, the creator of the alien creature from the movie Alien, also paid tribute to Böcklin in his dark biomechanical works, painting an homage to the Isle of the Dead in 1977, almost 100 years after the original version. Isle of the Dead is therefore more than just a painting. It is a timeless story that originated from personal pain and evolved into a canvas for the fears and desires of many generations. Its universal symbolism makes it accessible to each of us, and we can find ourselves in the quiet passage. And that's why it's art.